You're interviewing a few people, it sounds like.
We've been doing some man on the street videos lately, which have been quite fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
All right, good.
JB is going to ask you some questions, and then just off the top of your head, just tell us what your experience
Right.
is.
Good. Yeah, so what we're trying to accomplish in this, the end result of this will be a 15-minute presentation to the Stanford Technical Leaders Cohort,
Okay.
generally around conflict. And so the guiding questions that we were given for what we want to address, we thought we'd just ask you and get your perspectives on conflict in general, but specifically here at Stanford.
All right.
And the resolution.
So, and resolution. So let me just read through the questions that we'll ask you, and
Okay.
then that'll give you a little context for the answer, and then
All
we
right.
can go back to the beginning. So first we'll just ask you to define what is conflict and what does it mean to achieve resolution. Then that's kind of just setting the stage for us. The questions we were actually given, number one was, why is our culture so polite? And I feel like there's some assumptions in there that our culture is polite.
Right.
So I wanted to get your perspectives. A, do you believe it's true?
Right. I'll try to be polite when I answer.
So that's the first question.
Okay.
The second question was, how do we learn to set aside our fears regarding conflict and tough conversations? And again, there's assumptions in there that it's fear that's stopping us from having that.
Right.
So I think I'd like to ask you the more general question of, what do you think prevents us? What do you think are the obstacles to addressing conflicts? And then the third question was, what's the impact of not addressing conflict and not having those conversations? And then finally, what do you think we could do to shift the culture so that it becomes more amenable to having those conversations?
This is about a 4-hour answer
So yeah.
to do them all.
So
You can cook it down.
And we're gonna bring this down to about 5 minutes.
Okay,
So,
good.
I'm gonna edit down so you can talk as much as you want.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, if you don't mind, we'll start. What would you say is what is conflict?
Well, it's many different things, so it's a difficult question to answer. I think usually when we think about conflict, especially here, like in an institutional setting, there's something's happened, or there's been a series of experiences that at least one person is having where there's some discomfort or there's stress. So usually if there's conflict, there's an issue, and then someone is experiencing some kind of stress, and that means typically either being irritated, angry, frightened, or confused. Maybe those are the most common, with some issue that they're experiencing, and usually there's another person or persons involved. Usually it's between people, not always. Sometimes it's just the system trying to get something to happen, and it isn't, and so there might be a sense of frustration or dissatisfaction, that's going on.
Interesting. Okay. So, what then would it mean to achieve resolution?
It can be achieved in many different ways. So, usually, when I have a sense that there's been a resolution, it's because a person or persons who've come to talk with me about whatever the problem is are feeling a sense of greater clarity about what steps to take, less fear or anger about the issue, and sometimes it may also mean that there's been a meeting of the minds or a communication with some other party or parties where there's a greater sense of mutual understanding and trust, respect, and willingness to sort of cooperatively address something in the future, right? Those things.
Cool. Nice. Okay, so that's interesting to me. It sounded to me like you were saying conflict is basically presence of some sort of stress. So, or that stress is the indicator.
Yeah. I'm a psychologist by training. And I've done a lot of work over the years, doing that in psychotherapy. But I use as much Kleenex in this office as an ombudsman as I did in that work with mental health issues. So almost everyone who, by the time they come into this office, has already felt pretty stressed out, but and usually a sense of where do I turn? What can I do about this? Or maybe feeling hopeless or trapped or at their wits' end about what to do. So there's a lot of feeling that's connected with it. And conflict resolution often has to do with dealing with that component, what people are feeling, how other people are reacting to that, how those emotions are getting expressed, and are they something that you can express in the workplace? What are the risks involved with trying to talk directly about an issue? There's all sorts of interpersonal and emotional aspects to conflict that are really important to address to get things to move to the next step. Yeah.
Good. So in your experience, both as a psychologist and an ombudsman, would you say that there is a hesitancy about addressing difficult issues, particularly interpersonally, when you're in conflict with someone else?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's so many different levels at which people might experience resistance or reluctance. Some of it has to do with just the discomfort of talking about something where you disagree with another person. I mean, just at a very basic human level, when you have to raise an issue up where there's a difference of opinion, many people feel like, ooh, what's going to happen? How's that person going to respond? Are they going to be angry? Are they going to be hurt? Are they going to even understand?
Is this going to show up on my performance evaluation?
Well, yeah, then there's the next level, and that is, where will the ripples go from this conversation? What things do I need to be aware of? If I raise this issue up with this person, where might it go? How confidential is the conversation? Are they going to take my, hopefully I'm coming forward in a way to try to resolve something. They may take it as a challenge to my authority, or something that will expose a problem or a flaw that they have. They might be defensive. They might then be even more vindictive toward me. And if there's someone who has authority over me in this institution, I'm vulnerable. How do I protect myself? So there's many different levels at which people are thoughtful, cautious, careful about addressing conflict, even though it might be the elephant in the room that everybody knows is there. To actually address it, involves risk, right?
And so you mentioned a whole bunch of possible responses. Will they be angry? How will they take it? Will they take it as a challenge? Why are those things fearful? Why do we resist going there? Why is it scary if somebody disagrees?
Everybody's different about that. Some people are very assertive and straightforward, and others less so. Sometimes the people who are very assertive find out they're in a situation where that really isn't so adaptive, and that you get punished for being assertive rather than rewarded, and that it doesn't solve your problems. In fact, when you're assertive, you get targeted. So if you're in that kind of an environment, then you need to be careful, even if you're comfortable raising on a personal level, speaking your mind. You may find that on a political level, it's risky business. And other people, it's just a matter of how we were grown up, how we were trained. What was our culture like at home? Or were you encouraged to sort of say things and sort of address problems? Were there big problems that no one could talk about because it was really dangerous to talk about them? Were you given a program of what it means to be a good person or a nice person? And what does that have to do with how you approach conflict? So everybody has a different sort of family culture they came out of, where messages are embedded in about conflict. What's okay, what's not okay. And so we all bring a lot of that stuff in as well. And some people learn not only is it okay, but I'm going to express all kinds of feelings, that, and maybe not be so thoughtful about how it impacts other people. So that's, rather than backing away, it's people who are so aggressive in the way they approach, interactions and relationships that they're either unaware of, or they don't care, or they get their needs met by being bullies, and what have you.
So you're mentioning culture, and that is almost specifically one of our questions. Implicit in that, the question is, why is our culture so polite? And let's say, since you're an expert here at Stanford in particular, let's talk about Stanford culture. Do you think it's true at Stanford? Is Stanford generally a polite culture that avoids direct conversation?
So those might be two different things. I mean, you can probably be assertive in a very polite way, where you're not avoiding confrontation, but you're being very respectful. And of course, I have a skewed view of the institution because I hear all kinds of stories of people who are not being polite at all. Usually it's the people who will come into the ombuds office. Usually they feel they're at the receiving end of some kind of behavior, action, whatever it might be, where they may feel that their rights are not being acknowledged or respected. So now, at the same time, it may be that an institution like Stanford, that people are very respectful in a certain way in terms of not wanting to have public displays of conflict, and want to be thoughtful and political and diplomatic about how they say things, because it's a large, complex, hierarchical institution. That there is a certain amount of thoughtfulness that might go into conversation that has to do with people's antenna being out there about the political environment, as well as what their own needs are. And so I think it's just very complicated, and therefore sometimes things are not spoken about because someone says, well, I want to get promoted. If I talk about this issue, I won't get promoted. That's a blunt way of putting it. Or I might get a worse review, and I want to change jobs, and I don't want to have a bad file, so I'm not going to talk about this. Or it may be on a personal level. Geez, I start to shake when I think of having that conversation. I don't want to feel that uncomfortable, so I'm not going to have that conversation.
Okay. So I guess I'm still not clear, and maybe I don't need to be, but do you feel like at Stanford in particular, people are less likely to initiate quote-unquote disagreements? Well, it's not necessarily confrontational, but less likely to initiate those difficult conversations than in the culture,
Than Donald Trump?
American yes. But American culture in general, or perhaps California culture, do you feel like Stanford somebody brought up the term Stanford nice, which most of us had never heard of, but I don't know if you've heard that term.
I hear so much about the Stanford unnice that maybe I'm not the right person for that. When I'm speaking to people, usually they're in conflict. Maybe a lot of things have been said that weren't very nice at all, or actions were taken that weren't nice. I don't know if I view Stanford that way. Now, I will say, yes, you have people here who are highly educated, and they're thoughtful, and they're diplomatic, and that there is maybe a different kind of culture in academia than you might find in a neighborhood, in a corporation, although that's a whole other kind of kettle of fish, but it might have similarities. So I would hate to make a general statement about that and think that it would be really accurate enough to really be useful.
Okay. All right, cool.
Impact.
Yeah, I was gonna. So, what would you say, assuming that it's true that people are reluctant to initiate these difficult conversations, have you seen any particular cases? What's the impact of avoiding these conversations?
Well, there's many. If it's a significant conflict, one level of impact is that people have health consequences. So if someone's feeling a lot of stress because of a conflict and they are unable to get it resolved, either because they're unwilling to address it or because there's no real channel for resolving it, then they have stress-related symptoms that they're living with and are possibly growing, especially if it's a long term, and some of these things can take months or years being unresolved, where you might see stress-related health issues or absenteeism, morale problems, turnover, and some of that especially might be if there's a situation where people are feeling stress from authority above them that they're unable to resolve or address, that heightens the amount of stress that's involved because the degree of vulnerability is greater and the prohibitions about addressing it might be greater. There you see people who might be just turning over, leaving, or going out on stress or medical disabilities, absenteeism, attendance kinds of issues, can go on with that. So those are some of the institutional and personal things, that can happen as a result of unaddressed conflict. Sometimes people create conflict where there really isn't a very big issue, but now there is because they've overreacted to it. So rather than avoiding it, some people generate a lot of stress and conflict and then generate that for other people as well. So it's a personality kind of thing. Maybe they're really hot, they're explosive, or bullies. And they might be people in authority or maybe just colleagues, and there you have the same kind of thing. You're having stress being created and people generally want to avoid those people or work around them, or maybe managers don't even like to address problems with them because it's stressful. They're explosive and hard to deal with, and they'd rather just kind of not deal with it.
Change angle here for a second.
Oh, sure.
Just good talking to her though.
Okay.
Okay. So is there anything we as an institution or we as individuals could do to help facilitate having difficult conversations maybe earlier before the impacts, before they escalate?
One thing that doesn't really happen in academia too much is a training, particularly on the professorial side, for training for management and communication skills for managers. Because a lot of difficulties, especially where there's fear involved about addressing things, if there's a manager has basic skills and training about how to deal with people in their world, in their purview, that helps a lot, right? And some people have those skills naturally. And I think in academia, you see people are just kind of good at it. And they manage people well. They kind of deal with conflict in a way that doesn't heighten it and lowers stress for people. But that's just sort of luck. So there's no institutional plan in place for guiding people. That at least it's not enough, as much as it could be. Yeah.
What particular things would you train people on? Are there like 2 or 3 specific things, communication skills, that you would like to see people trained on?
Well, being able to listen, so teaching how to listen. I think a lot of things start there. For instance, if a person in the workplace feels like they can say what they need to say, even if they don't get their way, but they feel like they can say what they need to say, and they'll be heard and understood and respected in that conversation, a lot of stress goes out right there, and that solves a lot of problems, even if they aren't getting some specific outcome that they want. Now, if someone feels they can't even say what their problem is, or they feel shut down before they even have been able to say where they're coming from, because they're coming from somewhere, then there's more resentment and more fear. So listening skills, which pretty easy to teach, reflective listening, where people, anyone who supervises, but really anybody on the campus can learn from. It just helps take the stress out of situations. It makes conflict resolution a lot easier. And that it isn't all about who's right or who's wrong, who's a good person, who's a bad person, but just here's what I'm experiencing. And that's neither right nor wrong. And if people can listen in that way, then often the solving of the particular problem is rather simple. You know, it's clear. It's either yes or no, or hey, we can compromise, or, you know, we can have sort of a problem-solving conversation rather than feeling that this is a situation where one person has to dominate the other, or one's right and one's wrong, one's good and one's bad. You know, these kind of things which polarize conflict and increase it.
Okay. So listening skills is one skill that you feel like
Yeah.
should be taught.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Well, it's a combination of listening and assertiveness, maybe sort of diplomatic assertiveness, you know, and that would be knowing how to ask for what you need or want in a way that isn't off-putting or unclear. So being able to say things clearly enough. In other words, some people just sort of drop hints, and if the hints aren't picked up, then they feel like they've been shut down, when it could be that the message wasn't clearly enough delivered, or wasn't delivered with enough, like, hey, this is important to me. And at the same time, not going over on the other end of the scale where being assertive it turns into more being overly demanding or critical or hostile, you know, which really affects people. And it doesn't take much to get people really, you know, once someone's offended or feels disrespected, you know, they'll shut down, or they'll feel bitter, or they'll start to view the other person as an enemy or an adversary, or attribute negative things to them, and all those things make conflict resolution much more difficult. So sort of basic assertive skills, basic listening skills, those things, you know, I think would make a big difference.
Okay.
So if you're a new leader in an organization,
Mm-hmm.
you've just come into a leadership role, you haven't been in one before,
Mm-hmm.
and you've acquired a staff.
Yeah.
You have a staff member that, you know, now all of a sudden you're dealing with a new conflict
Okay.
or stressful situation.
Mm-hmm.
What are the three things that you could advise that new leader to do if you were to be in that office with that person, sort of as a little buzz in their ear? What was the first thing that you would tell them to do when someone comes and says, "This is not fair. I need this to happen"?
All right. Well, maybe listening and learning. If you're new, you know, it's always good to keep in mind not only what you hope to achieve, but that there's a history with everyone in the department you're coming into. There are patterns, there are personalities, there are politics, and there's a history there that you're just learning about. And that takes a while to really understand sort of the political elements that are going on, and the unique personalities of the people involved. And so generally, you know, unless it's an emergency kind of a situation, I encourage people to really begin to gather as much information as possible, not jump to conclusions. One person might tell you that another person is blah, blah, blah. And, you know, maybe that's true. Maybe you would view it a little differently, you know, with your own experience. So just trying to get a good enough understanding of the lay of the land, so that you then know when do you need to intervene and do something, when do you need to just hear someone out, let them talk, what kind of a supervisory style do different employees do best with, whether that's highly structured and closely watched versus give them a lot of freedom, you know, or a lot of verbal communication, or it's best not to just talk once in a while. Everybody, you know, might have a different way that they work best. And if you're curious about that as a leader and take some time to really learn those things, as well as knowing a bit about the history of just where your department lies and who else influences, you know, things there, you know, then you'll be more successful, you know, and be more accepted. Because usually there's a trial period where you're a new leader, where people don't quite know what to think of you. Some are maybe really looking forward to it. Others like the old regime. You're just new, and that's sin enough sometimes to just be a new face, and you're going to be tested. So if you're thinking maybe some things will take a year or two to address as opposed to in the next 6 weeks.
So we're going to edit this down and show this to a cohort of approximately 30 technical leaders at Stanford.
Okay.
Anything you have the stage, is there anything that you would like to say to people who are stepping up in a technical leadership role in particular, but leadership role in general?
Just that I would say I would show, I feel a sense of appreciation for people who want to take some responsibility for assuming a role like that of leadership, and that to be willing to experience all of the challenges that are involved and the uncertainties that go along with it, as well as the rewards of being able to accomplish and sort of fulfill, have more authority to maybe accomplish things than you would have otherwise, and that issues connected with human interactions and conflicts and otherwise can be just a central aspect of how successful you are in a role like that, and to any attention paid to trying to address rather than ignore or shut down conflicts that arise, but sort of leaning into them and trying to understand and respect everyone involved, as you make decisions, is going to pay off in the long run, both for you as a leader as well as for the department and morale, etc. So.
Do you have a David Rasch quote or a quote that you share with others? On anything?
A quote.
Yes.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Well, an issue that frequently comes up has to do with is the right thing being done, and people who feel that something wrong or that isn't the correct thing to be done, and it may not even be a policy issue. It might be just more like, hey, people shouldn't be treated that way. That's not right. And that there's a constant dynamic between maybe within an institution of taking care of individual rights versus sort of the agenda of the institution. And there's just a constant tension there and a pull. And I think it's good for people on all sides and all different levels in the organization to just be thoughtfully working with that, so that the environment can be as respectful as possible for individual rights, at the same time acknowledging there are certain needs the organization has to survive as well, and that there's going to be compromise needed in an ongoing way on some of those things.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for taking
Okay.
the time.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
One more thing. I'm guessing in your role as ombuds, that's a more reactive role. People come to you with situations that you need to react to. We're looking for a new president. If you were president for a month and had the opportunity to be proactive, to help mitigate some of the issues that you find yourself reacting to, what would you do?
I think I would boost initiatives toward management training. And try to find ways to do that with faculty as well as staff, and to just continue moving in that direction and adding more of what you might see in some corporations that put an emphasis on that, that would require and offer resources for leaders, about managing people, that would be ongoing and high quality training for that.
You mentioned similar to the things you see in the corporate world. Do you have specific things in mind? Are there specific programs?
Just management training programs where people might have a lot of specific sort of ways that they would be evaluated as leaders. That might then be how they would grow through the institution and obtain, be promoted. Whereas that's not really any part of promotion in academia, unless there's really, really egregious problems. It's really a different kind of mentality in academia, where the organization there's a lot of little islands of authority, with faculty who are tenured and have their own lab or their own, school that they're in, and control over their environment, and they aren't really required by the institution to have, what are really some very specific skills that have to do with how do you manage people, right? And they might not be interested in that, and I understand that, because they're really interested in their field of study. But in essence, people do end up running labs, managing people, making decisions that affect, employees' lives, and so there's a lot of, opportunity in academic institutions, not just here, for problems, because there isn't sort of a unified approach to management. Yeah.
Okay, great. Cool.
That makes sense. Have you ever worked for faculty before?
No, not faculty.
I have, so I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
Most definitely. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Some are really good at it, and some
Right.
really need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, are you aware of these leadership programs? Like, we're in the technical leader program.
That one I don't know so much about. I haven't heard
Yeah.
so much about that, but
Okay.
that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And there's a management leaders program, and I think an
There's
ITLP.
ITLP, which is nationwide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is the same kind of technical leadership program, but
Yeah.
it's nationwide. So
Uh-huh.
you can go out to different institutions and do workshops.
Right. So you see more of those
People.
initiatives among the staff. There's
Yeah.
maybe more opportunities than there is at the faculty
Okay.
level.
Yes. And do you are you ombudsperson for faculty, staff, and students?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we were thinking we should send you flowers or something. I love it.
Wow, that's a lot to cover.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
That's great.
Great.
Okay.
Anything else? Well,
Wonderful.
All right.